So, can anyone stop Ebola? Leaders around the world are giving that question their full attention today. The British Prime Minister, David Cameron, called an emergency security meeting. EU health ministers are gathering in Brussels, and in the United States, President Obama has cleared his diary and cancelled travel plans for a second straight day to figure out how to stop the spread of the deadly disease, after the CDC, leading the charge, promised and failed to stop Ebola in its tracks. And if America is having such trouble, what does it mean for everyone else? CDC Director Tom Frieden was grilled on Capitol Hill today.
And I will tell you, as the director of CDC, one of the things I fear about Ebola is that it could spread more widely in Africa. If this were to happen, it could become a threat to our health system and the health care we give for a long time to come.
The CDC is under fire, not least for reportedly allowing a nurse who said she had a fever to travel by plane. Amber Vinson has now been transported to a specialized unit at Emory Hospital in Atlanta. She, too, had treated the patient who died in Texas last week, just like nurse Nina Pham, who now is being sent for better treatment as well in Maryland, as nurses complain that they have not been properly trained to deal with this disease. President Obama has vowed to do more.
We are monitoring, supervising, overseeing in a much more aggressive way exactly what's taking place in Dallas initially, and making sure that the lessons learned are then transmitted to hospitals and clinics all across the country.
So, can Ebola be stopped? And is it too late to prevent it spreading even further? Joining me now in the studio is Sir Roy Anderson. He's Professor of Infectious Disease at Imperial College here in London. He was Chief Scientist for the British Ministry of Defence, and he's also advised the WHO and UNAIDS. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the programme. How bad is it?
Well, the situation in the three main countries affected, Sierra Leone, Liberia and Guinea, is very serious indeed. So the virus continues to spread. The doubling time of the epidemic, which is the time between the doubling in the number of cases, is running at about 25 to 28 days. So if we have 10,000 cases today, 25 days later, we're going to have 20,000 cases. So nothing as yet that has been done is slowing the spread of this virus.
So can anything? That is the obvious next question. What can stop this spread and this disease?
Well, you have very limited. There are no drugs to treat patients. There is no vaccine at the moment. So you have two options: quick isolation of the infected patient, the ill patient, and then the follow-up and quarantine of all the contacts of that patient. But this is the problem. If you now have a set of field hospitals being put in Sierra Leone and Liberia by United Kingdom and United States, the number of field hospitals is probably about 22 for the UK, 25 for the United States. Those hospitals have got to be able to deal with and quarantine a very large number of patients. And so one's fear is that the doubling time of this epidemic is going to escape the Western response at present.
And yet this is, or is it, a massive Western response? I mean, the United States has sent something like 4,000 military personnel, plus doctors, plus trainers, plus equipment. Britain has done something similar and is sending more to Sierra Leone. Obviously, the French are in Guinea. They are the only ones that can do this heavy lifting. Is it too late, though?
Well, I hope not. But I think it's going to take some time for these three countries to be able to allocate and deploy the resources that are required to slow this spread. I'm not totally convinced that these hospitals will actually slow the spread significantly. Their first task is to treat the infected or contact healthcare workers. So that's the first task, because these individuals are the most important. Stopping spread and quarantining in the population in these three major urban centres is going to be very difficult indeed. And so, although they may slow the spread, and we need more resources to do that, longer term, the solutions must be either immunotherapy, which is putting serum into infected patients, but most importantly, of course, in the longer term, a vaccine.
Well, let me ask you about that, because last week on the programme we spoke to Dr. Adrian Hill. He's of Oxford University, and he talked about trials being conducted right now. He thought they might take a long time, some 10 years to actually come to fruition. But what can you tell us about any advances in these vaccine trials?
Well, so far there have been trials in volunteers in the United Kingdom, United States and Mali. These individuals have volunteered to receive a trial vaccine. And Dr. Fauci announced quite recently that in the United States there have been no safety worries as yet of this inoculation into these patients. So then, if that continues to be good news, then the question is an international agency and regulatory authority one. It is, how can we speed up the process of getting this trial vaccine, first of all, manufactured on scale, and that's a challenge, real challenge for the companies, and then deployed as quickly as possible. Now, under the most optimistic scenario, you're talking about the first quarter to the first half of next year. And then the vaccine has to be used in the best manner possible, not only to protect healthcare workers, which is the primary function at the moment, but also to think about ring vaccination to slow the spread of this infection.
But are you hopeful for this vaccine? I mean, we just heard about the trial. Can you tell us anything new about it? Is it something that you think will actually do the trick?
So far, so good.
So that's good news.
That is good news, but there's a long way to go, and there's also very important decisions to be made by the World Health Organization and the governments of the United States and the United Kingdom about what trials would satisfy the safety and efficacy needs to get this.
Do we have that time?
I think if people really move, these decisions could be made in weeks.
Could be done in weeks?
Yes.
So this could be available in weeks, you're saying?
No, I'm saying that the availability of a candidate vaccine is going to take the manufacturing process to develop thousands and tens of thousands.
But the approval could be...
The approval and what would satisfy the international community to use a vaccine if everything went well.
And you're saying, frankly, that is the only way to stop the spread?
Well, I think the current quarantine and isolation has to be pushed very, very hard in the most affected areas. And WHO and United States, United Kingdom and France need to step up that effort. But longer term, to prevent this infection becoming endemic, not only in West Africa, but I really do fear, as WHO made the comment, that this might jump to the East Coast and other cities.
Well, the East Coast of the United States you're talking about, there are a huge number of questions, and we pose that question. If the US can't get a grip on this, you know, how can these other countries, and we've just talked about this a lot. Let me play you a little bit of an interview from Dr. Brantley, who was also infected, cured, and then he's been giving his blood to some others in the front lines. Listen to what he said about it.
I think there's a lot of irrational fear about Ebola spreading in the United States. If we think about what we've seen so far, we had one man who came from Liberia, contracted the disease there, came to America and got sick here. And now who else has gotten sick from him? It's 2 healthcare workers who were taking intimate care of him.
So is he right? Is this being blown out of proportion?
Well, I think for the Western countries, United States and Western Europe, probably yes. But here's an observation. The epidemic is spreading in Liberia, Sierra Leone and Guinea at a rate which is each primary case of infection generates 2 secondary cases. That's the average. In the United States, 2 secondary cases were generated, admittedly by healthcare workers who were caring for the very ill patient at that time. Now, many of us are surprised at what has happened in Texas. But I suspect now CDC will control nationally, not just state by state, the criteria and the protocols that are required to prevent this happening.
And yet,
again.
even after the death of this man, the infection of another nurse reporting she has a fever, she's allowed to get on a plane. Can I just play also a little bit of what the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, America's top military official, said about the possibility of mutation?
If you bring two doctors who happen to have that specialty into a room, one will say, no, there's no way it'll ever become airborne, but it could mutate, so it would be harder to discover.
He's caused a lot of controversy and a lot of fear with that.
Well, this virus is a little bit different from the viruses that were causing sporadic epidemics way back in 2004 and the previous 40 years. The number of changes in a code which has 19,000 bits is about 300, relatively small. So my first concern is not mutation. My first concern is getting this under control. And at the moment, there is no evidence to say that this is airborne droplet transmitted. However, I stress that this is a very difficult infection to study, and there's no evidence to say not. But my assumption and the evidence at the moment points to contact.
Professor Roy Anderson, thank you so much indeed for joining me tonight.